What 9 pounds of forgotten chicken taught me about executive stress, recovery, and rebuilding your life. This week, I threw away 9 pounds of chicken. I wish that sentence was an exaggeration. The chicken isn't the story. The story is what happened to my house, my stress load, and my cognitive bandwidth before I forgot the chicken existed. I had spent the day cooking chicken in homemade broth. The plan was simple: portion it out for meals for me and my sister, share some with our spoiled pets. When it finished cooking, I put it in the microwave to cool, not to reheat it, to protect it from the cats. Then I completely forgot it existed until the next day when my sister opened the microwave and discovered 9 pounds of exquisitely cooked chicken that was no longer safe to eat. As frustrating as that was, the chicken wasn't actually the story. The story started a few days earlier. Last week, we had foundation work completed on my home. This week, the flooring crew came in and began repairing the areas affected by the foundation issues, or so we thought. As they began pulling up the flooring, they discovered something much more significant than we had anticipated. The subfloor underneath was extensively damaged, warped, compromised, affected by moisture and mold. What appeared to be a flooring repair became a structural reconstruction project. The estimate changed dramatically, the timeline changed dramatically, and the amount of disruption in already small home occupied by 2 adults and 4 pets increased exponentially. By the end of the week, forgetting 9 pounds of chicken wasn't really surprising. In fact, from a neuroscience perspective, it was predictable. The executive stress formula, it's one of the central ideas behind my work, and it's that most people misunderstand the nature of stress. We tend to think of stress as a feeling. We say we're stressed because we're anxious, stressed because we're overwhelmed, stressed because we're exhausted. But stress is much more than an emotional experience. Stress is a load. Every responsibility, demand, uncertainty, obligation, conflict, transition, disappointment, loss, financial concern, health issue, caregiving responsibility, and major life event adds to the weight of the system. Some stressors are temporary, some are chronic, some are predictable, some arrive without warning. Most professionals spend years focusing almost exclusively on increasing their capacity to carry more. They become more productive, more efficient, more knowledgeable, more responsible, more resilient. And for a while, that strategy works until it doesn't. Because every structure has a load limit. Every bridge has a load limit. Every building has a load limit. Every foundation has a load limit. And every human nervous system has a load limit. What makes executive stress particularly dangerous is that high-achieving people often become exceptionally skilled at functioning while overloaded. They continue showing up. They continue producing. They continue leading. They continue solving problems. From the outside, they often appear successful. From the inside, the structure is carrying more weight than it was designed to support. This is where many of the coping strategies that concern us begin to emerge. Alcohol, workaholism, compulsive productivity, emotional eating, scrolling, shopping, anger, withdrawal, perfectionism, over-control. These behaviors are often misunderstood as the problem. In reality, they are frequently attempts to manage the problem. The problem is that the stress has exceeded the individual's current capacity to absorb, process, and recover from it. When that happens, the nervous system begins looking for relief, not because the person is weak, not because they lack discipline, not because they haven't learned enough coping skills, because human beings were never designed to operate indefinitely under loads that exceed their available resources. This is why I often tell clients that recovery is not fundamentally a willpower project. It is an architecture project. The question is not simply, how do I stop drinking? The question is, what kind of structure am I asking this life to rest upon? Because if the structure underneath is compromised, eventually something will begin to crack. For some people, it's alcohol. For others, it's burnout. For others, it's anxiety, depression, insomnia, chronic health problems, relationship difficulties, or emotional exhaustion. The symptom varies. The underlying principle does not, which brings me back to my house. When the flooring crew arrived, everyone believed we were repairing damaged flooring. Instead, they discovered compromised subflooring throughout most of the house. The flooring wasn't the real problem. It was simply where the problem had become visible. When stress exceeds the capacity of one of the biggest misconceptions I encounter when working with professionals, executives, first responders, attorneys and physicians, and other high achievers. It's that the belief that stress is primarily an emotional experience. People describe feeling overwhelmed, anxious, irritable, exhausted, distracted, or unmotivated. What they often fail to recognize is that stress is not simply something you feel. Stress changes how your brain allocates resources. Think about your brain as having a finite amount of bandwidth. Every problem requiring attention consumes some portion of that bandwidth. Deadlines consume bandwidth. Financial concerns consume bandwidth. Relationship conflict consumes bandwidth. Health concerns consume bandwidth. Construction crews tearing apart your house consume bandwidth. Unexpected 5-figure expenses consume bandwidth. Trying to coordinate life for 2 adults and 4 animals while portions of your home are under construction consumes bandwidth. Eventually, something has to give. The brain begins prioritizing survival-related tasks while reducing resources available for executive functioning. And that's where things get interesting. Executive stress is really a problem of executive function. The irony of executive stress is that it often impairs the very functions professionals depend upon the most. The planning, the prioritizing, working memory, task initiation, task completion, decision-making, cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, attention. These functions are largely mediated by the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is your strategist. It helps you think long-term. It helps you organize information. It helps you manage competing priorities. It helps you remember that there are 9 pounds of chicken cooling in the microwave. But under significant stress, the brain begins shifting resources away from these higher ordered functions and toward systems designed to detect and manage threat. This isn't pathology, it's biology. The problem is that modern professionals rarely face threats that can be solved through fight or flight responses. You can't punch a foundation problem. You can't outrun a 5-figure repair estimate. You can't physically battle uncertainty. Yet the nervous system responds as though these stressors require immediate action. As stress accumulates, cognitive performance declines. People begin forgetting things, making mistakes, missing details, losing track of conversations, struggling to focus, questioning their competence. Then they often become critical of themselves for experiencing completely predictable neurological consequences of chronic stress. The flooring was never the real problem. As I've reflected on the events of this week, what keeps standing out to me is how closely this mirrors the recovery process. Most people seek help because they are frustrated by visible symptoms. Alcohol misuse, burnout, anxiety, insomnia, relationship conflict, emotional exhaustion, loss of motivation, difficulty managing emotions. Those symptoms are real, they exist, but they are often the equivalent of damaged flooring. They're what people can see. They're what people trip over. They're what finally gets their attention, but they are not necessarily the source of the problem. As we begin exploring the architecture underneath those symptoms, we frequently discover something more significant: chronic stress, unresolved trauma, perfectionism, people-pleasing, identity issues, workaholism, avoidance patterns, emotional suppression, nervous system dysregulation. The issue is not simply the behavior. The issue is the structure supporting the behavior. In other words, what looked like a flooring problem turns out to be a subfloor problem. Recovery often feels worse before it gets better. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of personal growth, trauma recovery, and sobriety. People often expect improvement to feel immediately rewarding. Unfortunately, rebuilding rarely works that way. The first stage of rebuilding is exposure. You pull things apart, you assess damage, you discover hidden problems. You gather information, you revise plans. You confront realities you didn't previously know existed. The house frequently looks much worse before it looks better. Recovery often works the same way. When people stop using alcohol as a coping mechanism, they frequently become more aware of the stress before they become less stressed. When people begin trauma work, they often become more aware of old wounds before those wounds begin healing. When people start changing lifelong patterns, they often become more conscious of their conditioning before they develop healthier alternatives. This is not evidence that the process is failing. It's evidence that the process is working. The inspection did not create the damage. The inspection revealed it. This is Rebuild Your Life Month. I can't think of a better metaphor for rebuilding than what has unfolded in my own home over the last 2 weeks. Rebuilding isn't inspirational Pinterest content. It isn't a before and after photo. It isn't a motivational quote. It isn't cliches. Real rebuilding is messy, expensive, disruptive, inconvenient, sometimes discouraging, sometimes overwhelming, and almost always more complicated than you initially expected. But rebuilding is also an act of optimism, because every decision to expose hidden damage is a decision to stop building on compromised structures. Every decision to strengthen a foundation is an investment in the future. Every decision to examine the architecture of your life is an opportunity to create something stronger than what existed before. The goal is not simply to stop drinking. The goal is not simply to reduce stress. The goal is not simply to feel better. The goal is structural integrity. The goal is creating a life that can actually support the person you are becoming. And if somewhere in the middle of your own rebuilding process, you accidentally forget 9 pounds of chicken in the microwave, give yourself a little grace. It may not be evidence that you're failing. It may simply be evidence that you're carrying more than your nervous system was designed to carry alone.